Good afternoon. I saw Linda O'Hearn jump a foot in the air when I rang that bell. I got it good today. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Rotary Club of Madison. I'm Charles McClymans, club president, and it's great to see such a full room today. I'm glad to have you all here. And today's meeting is sponsored by Lynn Roth, who's been a member since 2015 and is former owner and CEO of Locus, Inc. He's sponsoring the meeting today on behalf of the Dane County Humane Society and Habitat for Humanity of Dane County. Thank you, Lynn, for doing that. We do have kittens in the back. They're very cute kittens. I have to hold back from taking them home with me. So we have kittens and other information about Habitat on the table. So the Dane County Humane Society provides refuge, healing, and new beginnings to thousands of companion animals, exotic species, farm animals, and injured or orphaned wild animals every year. Habitat for Humanity of Dane County brings people together to build homes, community, and hope. Habitat Dane partners with over 100 families every year to help them achieve strength, stability, and self-reliance through home ownership, home repair, financial capability training, and Dane County's first furniture bank. Thank you, Lynn, for sponsoring these organizations and this meeting. Remain standing, and our opening music today will be Darren Harris is going to lead us in singing today's patriotic song, God Bless America, with Jeff Bartell at keyboard, and then Darren will lead us in singing Try to Remember.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans wide with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. We need it right about now, yeah? All right, so I want to introduce a song from the Fantastics, 1960. Some of you remember. It's a musical with music by Harvey Schmidt and book and lyrics by Tom Jones. It tells an allegorical story about two neighboring fathers who trick their children into falling in love by pretending to feud, which is an homage to Romeo and Juliet. The show's original off-Broadway production ran a total of 42 years. Listen to this, a total of 17,000 plus performances, making it the world's longest running musical. Try to Remember is its signature song, very appropriate for our talk today on psychedelics. Please join me. Try to remember the time of September when life was slow and oh so mellow. Try to remember the kind of September when grass was green and grain was yellow. Try to remember the kind of September when you were a tender and callow fellow. Try to remember, and if you remember, then follow. Follow, 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 follow. Here we go. December, it's nice to remember, although you know the snow will follow. Deep in December, it's nice to remember, without the hurt, the heart is hollow. Deep in December, it's nice to remember the fire of September that made us mellow. Deep in December, our hearts should remember and follow. Follow, 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 follow. Thank you.
Well done.
Yeah.
Well done, Darren. That's hard to follow. So. Okay, Sean Carney. Sean is here. He's going to introduce our guest today.
Thank you, President Charles. We have several guests here today, so we're very fortunate guests and some visiting Rotarians. I'm going to introduce our guests, and I would ask the guests to stand when I call your name, as well as the Rotarians, and then we'll give them a big welcome downtown Rotary applause once we're done. So, Diane Abishwa, guest of Fred Mose. Frida Bjornstorter, guest of Melanie Ramey. Glenda Carba, guest of Joan Collins. Marty Carba, guest of Joan Collins. Please stand, guest. Thank you. Hillary Hems Kavanaugh, guest of Lynn Roth. Corey Marino, guest of Peter Gray. Kayla Minier, guest of Emily Grunwald. Bob Molinowski, guest of Carl Gutendorf. Leah Molinoff, guest of Dave Molinoff. Emily Richter, guest of Ted Ballwig. Paul Ryder, guest of Susan Schmitz. Kristen Ruzinski, guest of Nick Curran. Lisa Smith, guest of Loretta Hemseblock. And Cynthia Van Buskirk, guest of Maria Hyde. We also have some visiting Rotarians. David Irwin, visiting Rotarian from Elmbrook, Wisconsin, and guest of Rick Kiley. Bill Riley and Amanda Riley, guest visiting Rotarians from Bartlesville, Oklahoma. So all you guests, welcome. Let's give them a big applause.
Thank you, Sean, and welcome to all of our guests. Today's moment of gratitude is going to be shared by Jara Rios Rodriguez. Jara, would you like to come up? She has been a director. She's director of operations for Collaboration for Good, Inc., and she joined our club last year, and she will now give us her Rotary moment of gratitude.
Yeah, good to see you too. Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. Can you see me? So the question to be answered in gratitude today is, why am I a Rotarian? And I could tell you that I am a Rotarian because in 2005, life brought me from Puerto Rico to Madison to study a doctorate. I could say that I am a Rotarian because one of the interests of my now ex-boss, because my position was eliminated just a day before Pat called me to express gratitude today, was that I started developing relationships with you, the influential people of Madison. Having told you that, in the middle of receiving shocking news, I was being asked to be grateful, and I responded. So let me tell you why I am really a Rotarian. I am a Rotarian because despite of the fact that my life has had its shares of mishaps, and I have ended up tied to a place that is not my country, a place where being a woman, a Latina, short, brown, Spanish-speaking, with accent, talking loud and dressing very loud, and other characteristics doesn't fit. And that has made me a very easy target of discrimination. In the middle of all of that, I have had the strength to do my homework. And I no longer live in loneliness and in the pain that loneliness might produce on me from day to day. I am a Rotarian because I have moved from that loneliness to solitude and from pain to enjoyment. This movement has allowed me to give freely and to give from the abundant, endless fountain of knowledge and service that inhabits me. I am a Rotarian because I help entrepreneurs, young adults, and students to become who they want to be. I am a Rotarian because for whatever reason, I have been put in a position of having a voice. I am a Rotarian because I assume the responsibility for the history in which I live. Because even when I am not the perpetrator of illnesses or of aches in my time, I aid in finding solutions. I am a Rotarian because I volunteer my time to create spaces of learning and understanding about others. Sharing the Cultural Awareness Fellowship, teaching about literature and otherness at the university, aiding the BIPOC community to heal traumas of ostracism, discrimination, and belittling. I am a Rotarian because no matter what life brings to me, I have decided to continue being a distributor of hope. And for that, I am incredibly proud, humble, and grateful. Thank you. Yes.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hara. That's excellent. Thank you for sharing your story and your passion for Rotary. And clearly, you have an audience that appreciated your message. Mary Donahue is going to provide an update on our community grants process. She is our current chair. She is the chair of our philanthropy team. So come on up here, Mary.
Thank you, President Charles. I just need to take one small second and say, that's the reason I'm a Rotarian. Thank you. Thank you. Let me get a little discombobulated. I'm Jen Savino, and I chaired the... Oh, wait, I lost my place. I'm back now. Okay. I'm Mary Donahue, and I serve as the club's philanthropy chair team leader this year, and Jen Savino's stunt double, because Jen Savino is truly and indeed a superwoman. In the last couple of years, Jen led an ad hoc committee that was created after the 2021 membership survey to review our grants program. That's what they did. The ad hoc committee held a number of meetings over that 2-year period and invited many members to participate in focus groups. The recommendations that came out of those focus groups and committee work were approved by our club board and foundation trustees in May. The recommendation included the expansion of our ethics symposium and the creation of 2 grants committees that replace our former community grants program. So I have the joy of reporting on all of the work that they did without doing any of the heavy lifting. Thank you again, Jen and other members. The symposium committee will be moving forward with the gradual expansion, and Bob Schumacher is leading that effort. Additional funding to that committee will allow us to expand on this program that is downtown Rotary built and branded. We have also created a grant opportunity that is called Excellence in Education, and Becky Steinhoff will be leading that. She's created an application process and evaluation, and this grant offers the opportunity to expand or enhance an existing educational opportunity for the impacts on the lives of underserved students in our community. These grants will be larger and more impactful, and they will better align with our club's priorities around youth and academic success. The final piece of this is the Innovation Grants program. Innovation grants will be smaller, faster to fund, grants amounts of about $3,000 to $5,000 for organizations which wish to evaluate, test, launch, expand, or improve a project. Herman Bauman was involved at the podium a few weeks ago to tell you about that application and evaluation process that was created for this new program. There's so much work that has gone on behind the scenes with so many Rotarians participating in it. All of these committees are on track to finalize their work and make recommendations to our club board and foundation trustees next month. Our goal is to announce the newly funded grants as we launch our fund drive this coming November. That's really the thought behind it, really kind of aligning everything, bringing the money that all of you have contributed so graciously to programs that are local, on the ground, nearby, and we can really commit to as a club. More details will be shared soon, and if you have any questions, you can feel free to contact Superwoman Jen Savino, who's done all of this stuff, or me, or Charles, or the Rotary office. Thank you for all the hard work, and thank you.
Great, thank you, Mary. Thank you, Jen, and all of the team members that have been working on this for the past several years. It is a big lift for our club, but you will all have the chance to participate in the process very soon with your donation. Birthdays. We have birthdays to celebrate with a bit of humor and wisdom that complements Rotary's mission, and we also encourage members to make a gift to our Synergy Scholarship Fund. On September 17th, Jim Taylor, who says, "Please support Rotary's Polio Plus campaign. The pandemic reversed some of our progress. We need to fight back." September 18th, Nate Babel. September 18th, Aaron Embry. September 18th, Majid Sarmadi. September 20th, Ann Lukey. September 20th, Greg Zakarski. September 21st, Carla Tennis. September 22nd, Londa Dewey. September 23rd, Bridget Frazier. September 23rd, Alan Korodzinski, who shares from James Patterson's Kiss the Girls, page 387. Living at risk is jumping off a cliff and building your wings on the way down. Thank you for that, Alan. September 23rd, Peggy Lesgrenier. Thanks to all of our celebrants for their contributions to the Madison Rotary Foundation, and please join me in wishing them a happy birthday. Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, dear Rotarians, happy birthday to you. Great, thank you, Jeff. I just have one announcement, a reminder that we're accepting nominations still for our annual Manfred Swarzensky Humanitarian Service Award. So if you haven't gotten them in yet, please get them in to the committee. They're due on Friday, September 29th. We do have members in the news as well. Kaleem Kerr was quoted in an article in Madison 365 about One City Schools to open on-site childcare for all staff members. Renee Moe was quoted in an article titled Champions for Positive Change Turn Out to Help. Bill White is recovering at home from a surgery. I think he broke a leg, so let's keep him in our thoughts as he continues to heal. If you'd like to send him a card or anything, you could. You have his address in the roster, or you can send it to the Rotary office. I know you're all here for our program today, right? A very interesting program, and I really appreciate the good work of the program committee, Janet Perino and all the committee members, in continuing to bring us really interesting programs every week. On today's program, the topic is the therapeutic use of psychedelics for mental health and substance use disorders. Speaking with us about this topic are CHANTELLE Thomas and Dr. Todd Kammerzelt. Dr. Thomas is a clinical psychologist specializing in addiction treatment, trauma, and health psychology. Dr. Thomas is among the leaders in the area of the use of psychedelics and emerging therapies to treat adults with PTSD, substance use disorders, and depression. She is a lead trainer, facilitator, and supervisor for several active clinical research trials involving psilocybin at the UW-Madison. There you got a blooper, Brian. Okay. Dr. Todd Kammerzelt is an addiction psychiatrist. He is currently the medical director of Midwest Detox and has worked in residential treatment at the Manor since 2018. He previously held the roles of staff psychiatrist at the Madison VA and unit chief for an adult co-occurring disorder program at the Brattleboro Retreat in Vermont. We look forward to your presentation, Dr. Thomas and Dr. Kammerzelt, and we have made a contribution in your honor to the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund. I want to mention that we'll also have Q&A after the presentation. So let's welcome Dr. Ted and Dr. Chantelle.
Okay. I've been warned this mic is a problem sometimes. What a pleasure to be with you here today. Okay, just trying to settle myself a little bit. This is an intimidating room of experience, so I'm taking that in. And we want to do good justice to this work so we can be translational and not alienate anyone in the process and build bridges for understanding. Todd and I have worked side by side in this space for close to 4 years with psychedelics. Yeah. I'm also going to make sure that I pass the mic. I'm not always great at passing the mic. So Todd is here for support, and hopefully you'll hear some words from him as well. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be with you here today, and made slides that are fairly engaging so that you wouldn't have to stare just at us. And this topic is far too large to condense into this time frame, so I'm also acutely aware of that, although you gave us 3 extra minutes from our start time, so bless you for that. What I want to start by saying is that it's incredibly, like, we hear the term psychedelics, maybe some of us not so much, but some of us more as we hear it more in the media, as we're hearing more about these clinical trials, as we hear more about Michael Pollan's documentary and his book. It's incredibly important to get a little more specific about what type of psychedelic we're talking about, because they are not all equivalent. They're actually very different compounds. And one thing that we hope to drive home today is that they function very differently in different environments, at different dosage ranges, depending on how you ingest them and who is around you while you do so, and how much assessment, preparation, and support you receive, and most importantly, the intention by which you are taking them. So these are really critically important pieces to highlight. And here's just an overview that I won't get into, but it gives you a sense of how complex what we're actually talking about is. There's many different types of psychedelic compounds. An interesting piece to this is that some of them are naturally produced in nature, and some of them have been synthesized in laboratory settings. And so that's important to also be aware of. For example, you'll hear a lot about MDMA in the news, and that is a synthetically derived compound, whereas psilocybin, magic mushrooms, is actually something that is naturally occurring, just to highlight 2 of those. And this quote comes from Dr. Stanislav Grof, who was actually a psychiatrist from the Czech Republic, who had been involved in early clinical research with LSD quite some time ago and moved to the States in the 60s. And he has this interesting quote, which I really love, highlighting that psychedelics are to the study of the mind what the microscope is to biology and the telescope to astronomy. So again, really underscoring in the right set and setting, with the right screening, with the right support, that these are incredible tools for understanding how the mind works. And in addition to understanding how the mind works, they can inform us greatly about what's needed in terms of a shift in how we treat mental health conditions and how we treat processes involved with substance use disorders. So how can we use these compounds to better understand what's needed, and most importantly, what has been missing in our existing healthcare system in terms of the approach? My husband, who also works at UW-Madison, he's a professor there. And he works, you'll see him in some of these pictures, but he highlighted this for me, that apparently Humphrey Osmond and Aldous Huxley, famous author that you may or may not have heard of, in an exchange back and forth in letters when they had been doing some of their own clinical research with mescaline, said to each other that the best way to describe a psychedelic was to fathom hell or soar angelic, just take a pinch of psychedelic. And what I want to underscore there is the either or. You could soar angelic, or you could be in the depths of hell. And this is a really important thing to emphasize when it comes to working with these compounds. I'll also say that Dr. Stanislav Grof also came up with the term non-specific amplifier. So these compounds seem to be able to amplify things. Now, if you do them in a party setting and you're with music or you're with friends, you could get the outside environment amplified. But the way that we use them in clinical therapeutic use, what we're trying to do is amplify the internal environment of the person that's taking the substance. And so that's a really important distinction. And we do some things to help prepare people to explore what's inside as a way to understand more about what needs to change and what needs healing. Okay, so that's a really important distinction there. And along those lines, in terms of clinical research over the last decades, is this idea of how do we quantify different experiences, because we do a lot of work with assessment, preparation, diagnostic screening, and as much work as we do, we cannot predict an experience. This is the most interesting part of this. What we're really doing is shifting out of the role of expert by facilitating this work. And we're aligning ourselves with the idea that the person who's most expert in understanding what is needed is actually the person that we're helping. And so we really shift ourselves out of an expert role where we're not giving them advice, but we are preparing them that they could have a mystical experience where they feel like they've literally been in the presence of God for 4 hours, or they could have an incredibly challenging experience, or they could re-experience a type of death, or they could experience a type of rebirth. And what's really quite striking is no matter the compound, you cannot predict the experience, because again, what it's doing is amplifying what is needed within that person's system to understand what needs to change. So this is a picture of UW-Madison's School of Pharmacy dosing room. You may have driven past the campus many times, and you may have very well been driving past the campus when someone was having a full-blown mystical experience occasioned by psilocybin in the School of Pharmacy. And many people would not know that. And so this is one of the dosing rooms that we've had the great privilege of being able to utilize. You can notice that the environment is meant to look very much like someone's living room, a nice living room. And that's based on this concept of amplification and based on this concept of set and setting. Todd, do you want to talk a little bit about Integrata?
Yeah, so the the picture below is a room of ours at Integrata, which is where we do outpatient ketamine-assisted psychotherapy in Brookfield. The room kind of looks, we try and make it, again, as warm as possible, so there's actually is an orchid in every room that we do dosing in. There's portraits on the wall. There's a desk and writing. Each room has an attached bathroom as well. So it's meant to be very comfortable and very warm and not a sterile clinical feel. In addition, we have weighted blankets for people to use and soft, kind of fluffy, comfortable, textured blankets as well. So when folks are in an experience, often senses are changed, senses can blend, and having textures can be really comforting. We also have aromatherapy. We invite people to put eye shades on. And as Chantelle was saying, when people use psychedelics recreationally, it's a lot of external input that is incorporated into their experience. When we're using it clinically or therapeutically, it's very much an invitation for people to go inwards. So I think of it, I primarily work with ketamine as the medicine, but as ketamine creates an opportunity to have a key that essentially unlocks a door within. And so the more we can kind of remove visual stimuli, because it's such an overbuilt part of our normal experience of the world, we are inviting smell. Music is an important piece of the experience, and so we have curated playlists, and we talk about music preference and selection in advance of the experience. But those are some of the ways that we harness the set and setting and the stimuli that we can navigate, knowing that there's the majority of the experience is going to come from within, and we want to encourage that, because it's very much not a cognitive experience, although people come in with an intention and they come in with hopes of a certain outcome and can't help but try and predict what it will be like for them. What actually comes up is coming from a different place, not a cognitive place. And so that is sometimes difficult for people to orient to, that there's a wisdom or a knowledge base or an innate healing capacity that exists within all of us that doesn't live up here, but lives somewhere else in our core.
Oops, I went backwards here a little too quickly. That's Bruce and Marcela Autalora, and they are two of the head trainers and early researchers of MDMA-assisted therapy, and that's a picture of them doing their work. They're also my mentors and supervisors, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the other thing that I want to underscore is within the context of the clinical research that's happening, there's a lot of screening and preparation. So, for example, in the MDMA-assisted therapy trials for PTSD, people receive close to 50 hours of therapy in the context of doing 3 dosing sessions. So we do 3 to 6 hours of preparation in addition to heavy medical screening and psychological screening to make sure people are appropriate and they meet candidacy for eligibility. Then you have the dosing session themselves, which are attended by 2 therapists or trained clinicians, providers. And then you have, after that, a very important phase called the integration phase, where, again, people are followed. They have a session immediately following that lasts usually for 90 minutes, and then they have multiple sessions after that. So again, this is a very therapy-heavy model. I think I mentioned this prior, but again, I just want to underscore it. I think what's really striking about many people who might be appropriate for psychedelic interventions are people that have tried really hard in the existing healthcare system to get help, and it hasn't moved the needle for whatever reason. The existing psychotropics we have are not reaching them. The therapies that are available, for whatever reason, I mean, I think it's so hard to get out of impression management mode. You know how many people show up to therapy, they want their therapist to like them? And how many other people show up to therapy trying to think on the way to therapy, what am I going to talk about today, right? Like they're trying to come up with ways to keep the conversation going. So this idea of being able to really talk about the thing that creates the most pain, people need help with that. And sometimes it works through traditional pathways, but for many people, those places inside of us that are most hurting are unlikely to be reached through some of those methods. Many people will be, but how about all the people who are not? So it's really, and then it's also kind of shifting this paradigm that if you haven't been able to get well in our existing healthcare system, it's not your fault. You know, we label people as treatment resistant, which is a very interesting term, right? You've resisted the treatment we've tried to give you, and that is why you're unwell. Instead of saying, man, we need to work harder to figure out how to reach you. So the mindset that we're holding within this whole paradigm is really a shift that's about depathologizing people who struggle as not being unwell or resistant to treatment, but rather we have not been able to give them the tools to reach what they need. So that's a really important thing. I'm mindful of the time, and so you can look this up online. There's also a psychedelic symposium, a UW psychedelic symposium. It's happening at USONA's campus. It's November 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. If you want to learn more about how psychedelics work at a brain level, please come to that symposium. There's so many smart people there that can talk to you all about it, but in a real brief overview, what we know is happening is it's happening at a molecular level. There's cellular changes, there's neurocircuitry, dendritic changes in the neural pathways that happen with psychedelics, which is really quite striking. And there's changes in the way brain circuits work in the brain that directly contribute to people being able to think differently about themselves, their history, and the problem they're facing. So there is direct brain-based changes that support the capacity to think differently. This is very interesting, is that when you give people a dose of psilocybin and you give them a dose of ketamine, not at the same time, different people. And these are actually rats. This is an animal study. But what we see in brains of people that are overstressed is, within the brain you have all these dendritic spines and channels and pathways for neural signaling and communication. When a brain is under stress, those pathways shear and become more rigid and less available connections exist. After one dose of psilocybin, or in the other instance, one dose of ketamine, we see a massive expansion of the available dendritic spine. So we see regrowth at a neurocircuitry level that is quite striking. And what that implies is that there are available connections that now exist for a period of time that can be worked with to help people shift perspective on what the problem is for them, which is really striking. Todd, do you want to say something about this?
Yeah, so I love this slide. This is essentially, if you can think of this as a skull, and there's regions of the brain, and there's always some baseline activity going on. And if you look at the slide on the left, the placebo, all right, so there's some connectivity, there's regions of the brain that are communicating with one another. There's some lines, it's kind of faint to see, but that go kind of from different regions or across the globe, if you will. What ends up happening, or what we're seeing, is what plays out with this dendritic growth and kind of increased neuroplasticity is an opportunity. It essentially clears the field, or kind of does a pause to the normal operating system or the default mode network, and creates an opportunity for it to reboot and for new connections to be created. And that's this sense of there's just more space, there's more opportunity, there's more choice for people to move. They're not stuck in their old ways and old patterns of behaving. And so this is a really beautiful example of showing this new connectivity or new connections across different regions of the brain that can happen. One other way of thinking about it that I found is really helpful, and I've heard it described as though we're moving on the surface of the moon, right? It's a very cratered place, and we get stuck in these craters, and craters may be patterns of anxiety or depression or other ways, trauma responses, that we get stuck in these craters. And the way of thinking about it is the medicine treatment, psychedelic treatment, essentially smooths the surface of the moon over, and there's much freer ability to move across the landscape, and you don't get stuck in these depressions, right? In the literal depressions or figurative depression of the landscape, and there's much freer ability to move and connect, and there's a lot greater ease of choice along the way.
Yeah, and again, it's more complex than we can go into, but this concept of these compounds being able to temporarily quiet the stories that we have about ourselves. If you think about it, people who struggle with depression, anxiety, PTSD, substance use disorders, they have very fixed ideas about who they are and what is possible. So quieting the self-referential processing about who I am and what's possible to create these really powerful windows that maybe that's not the story. Maybe something else can happen. These are all of the academic institutions studying psychedelics. Just take a look at that. This is not a flash in the pan thing. This is significant research that's been going on. Some of the earliest research was started at UCLA in 2004. I could go into the studies that are happening at each of these universities. Please notice the University of Wisconsin-Madison, because a lot of research is happening there. I'm going to highlight that. Also, just look at the number of publications, science publications by year. That is hard to read. I apologize. But what you can see is there's a massive spike that was starting kind of towards the mid-2005s, and that last spike is 2020. Look at the number of percentage of publication. Just the total publication count has gone up dramatically. So research is happening. It's happening fast. This is the entire psychedelic team at UW-Madison. You may not be aware of this, but there's been clinical psychedelic research happening at UW-Madison for over 10 years. They were the home of the first safety study for high-dose psilocybin. I was part of that study, so was my husband, Chris Nicholas, on there. So was Paul Hudson and Randy Brown. Those are primary investigators. That's our team of clinical trialists. Again, too much detail to go in, but what I will say just at a very high level, again, ketamine is unique because ketamine is one of the compounds that's currently available. So you could actually explore ketamine-assisted psychotherapy or ketamine treatment now. It's been around for a very long time for medical purposes and as an anesthetic dissociative, and it's used in surgical procedures. It's incredibly safe. It's the primary way to sedate children because it's so safe. If you dose it into certain ranges, it has psychedelic properties. And Todd and I have worked exclusively with ketamine over the last 3 to 4 years with folks who have substance use disorders and trauma and had really profound results. There's been amazing work coming out of Yale and out of Columbia University for the implications for substance use disorder treatment. MDMA was granted breakthrough status in 2016, where the FDA shepherded it on a fast track because of the treatment outcome results and its implications for helping people with PTSD. There's an active trial that's been happening at the Bronx VEA Mount Sinai by Rachel Yehuda's lab, looking at treating our veterans with MDMA-assisted therapy. Psilocybin was granted breakthrough status in 2018, 2019, and also has been shown to have significant implications for alcohol use disorder, depression, opiate use disorder, and methamphetamine use disorder, which is currently being studied at the UW. And LSD was like one of the early research psychedelics and now is coming back into popularity. And there's a large clinical trial that happened with generalized anxiety disorder and LSD. They're wrapping it up in the next couple of months. This is just a quick, again, high level in the last 3 minutes. Okay, so PTSD results. So you can see that blue line is people who received the MDMA-assisted therapy without MDMA. And then the red line is those who received it with, okay? And that's showing the significance of the drop of PTSD symptoms. So just now notice that people had drops in both groups. That's because there's a specialized therapy that's going alongside of it that is also underscoring this idea that there is nothing wrong with you and your symptoms are adaptations, and we believe that you know what you need to heal and we need to get out of the way and support you. So just that therapy alone caused significant drops, but even more significant drops for those who had the MDMA treatment. And what's also really striking about the MDMA research is that where people land at 6 months is significantly lower. Where they landed a year later is even lower than the 6 month point. Lower meaning better. So there's an effect that keeps unfolding for these people after time. That's quite striking. That's very unique for treatment effects. Psilocybin, this came out of USONA, which is in our own backyard. This is Chuck Grayson's paper. This was the big phase 2 trial for psilocybin for depression. And you can see this is only with a single dose of psilocybin with that preparation. Look at the drops here. Also notice from baseline, everybody dropped once they had some nice therapeutic contact. Again, with this idea that there is nothing wrong with you and we're preparing you to believe there's something inside of you that can heal this. Just that alone. And then you see significant drops that sustain over time. This is at a 43-day point. This study is fairly recent. This was just published last month. I can't get into the alcohol use disorder. It's great too. It's encouraging. This is from Bogenschutz, and this is a multi-site study from NYU, and it's also University of New Mexico, and this is really quite striking because what we see is significant reduction in drinking days. This is with the therapy alongside, again, not the one that I was speaking about, but actually very specific around alcohol use and reduction. So we are seeing an impact of the therapy always, and then we're seeing a differential impact of these folks who actually then also receive the psychedelic compound, which has staying power, again, which is quite striking. The University of Wisconsin-Madison, my husband said, put some slides up about UW and where we're seeking funding, because we are actually trying to put together a trial that looks at using MDMA versus psilocybin for veterans with PTSD. The veteran population is so deeply in need, and we are looking at different ways to reach them. The trial results for working with veterans for MDMA assisted therapy have been really strikingly effective, which is super exciting. because they have all the treatment available to them through the VA, right? And they've got a lot of treatment that is accessible, and it moves the needle for some, but not for many. So we have to do better. We have to try creative ways to reach these people. Right now, we're actively recruiting for a safety study with methamphetamine use disorder. Tragically, I don't know if you've seen the stats lately, but fentanyl use is on the massive rise over the last 2 years, and closely behind it, by comparison, in terms of the change, is methamphetamine use disorder. This is a growing problem for us as a nation. So we need, and again, many times people with methamphetamine use disorder never present for treatment. We've been working on this trial ourselves. I've been directly involved in guiding this study, and it has just been really remarkable to see what's been happening for folks. Let's see. Those are the publications coming out of the work that's happening at UW-Madison. These are top-tier journals: New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, Nature Medicine. That's as good as you can get with a science journal. My husband's an author on each one of these papers. I'm going to brag a little bit about him. Chris Nicholas. And there are special considerations, like what we want to underscore is not everyone is appropriate, but many people will. Sadly, many people will not have access. The same systemic discriminatory practices that exist in our current healthcare system will also play out in the psychedelic space. There's not enough BIPOC representation. There's not enough BIPOC facilitators. That's going to be a major issue that we're looking to address at different levels. There's a lot of stigma attached for BIPOC communities for very good reason, because of the criminalization of efforts around drug use. And there is a lot of risk if people are not properly trained, because people who enter into these states are more vulnerable, they're more exposed, they're less guarded, less defended, less protected, and we need to make sure that training is adequate, people are adequately screened, and this research is new. And we need community education so people know how to seek out what's appropriate for them. And they also know how to identify, sadly, some bad players in the space who will be looking to capitalize this and monetize this in ways that do not protect the best interests of our most vulnerable populations. Are we done?
I think we're done. Should we sit down?
You got to go first. State your name.
My name is Nancy Young. I'm interested in if you would share with us the process you go through to select the clients that you're going to work with. What are you looking for? What qualifies them and what disqualifies them?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Nancy. So it's pretty cut and dry in the research setting. The criteria is very strict. On the outpatient side, using ketamine, which is the one substance that is available that's been around for, gosh, I think it was FDA approved in 1970, so has loads of data, loads of safety data, and the experience is a much shorter experience. But our selection process is oftentimes, gosh, maybe 60% of our folks have been referred by other therapists or are working with a therapist that we work with who's been trained in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy facilitation. So that's really important, is that people are doing their own work in real time, kind of in leading up to seeing us. In addition, that their therapist, if not knowledgeable, is at least warm to them moving into the psychedelic space as part of their treatment course, and willing to kind of continue working with them afterwards. So, you know, on the outpatient side, it's less rigorous as far as the intervals and the number of sessions. We've kind of taken our model off of that script, but have a little more flexibility. One of the things about ketamine, in addition, compared to some of the other traditional psychedelics, is it tends to be more accommodating with other medications. So there's less concern if people are on mood stabilizers, if they're on medications to treat depression and anxiety. Many of the clinical research studies require people to be tapered off of them because there can be some interactions. Ketamine works through a different mechanism in the brain and generally plays very nicely, if you will, with traditional medications that people are taking. So there are some concerns about I guess medically that have to do with blood pressure, ocular hypertension, glaucoma, those sorts of things. Ketamine can give a temporary bump in blood pressure, and so that's something we want to make sure cardiac-wise that people are cleared. But there's a few other areas that we highlight, but in general, it's much gentler on the system because it's in shorter duration and it has a different mechanism of action.
Dave Johnson, thank you for your presentation. Aaron Rodgers made a comment that he was on the psychedelic mushrooms and he recommended his teammates experiment or do something. Now, did he do that clinically or in the mountains of?
No, because really, unless he enrolled in a clinical trial that the identity of clinical trial participants is confidential. I don't believe he was speaking about a clinical trial. Some people will travel to other parts of the world to do compounds in South America. They'll go do ayahuasca somewhere else or ibogaine in Mexico. So what many people will do is they'll go outside of the U.S. and seek out some of these plant-based medicines that are inherent to indigenous communities. And some of those retreat centers are very well run and some of them are not. And so there's a tremendous amount of risk within that. The only psychedelic that you can really work with in the United States legally right now is ketamine, and that is soon changing in Oregon because of bills that have been passed there, which allows Oregon to legalize the use of psilocybin. But that isn't actually in practice just yet. People are still gearing up for that. And then a lot of people seek out underground guides or facilitators, and they do this work outside of the purview of what's been legally sanctioned. And there has been a lot that we've learned in clinical trial research from underground guides. So they have been working with these compounds since they were taken offline in the Nixon era. And so that research, the work they've been doing on their own is really important, but there's also tremendous risk in working with folks in an underground capacity because there's no vetting system and there's no recourse if something goes badly. So very important that, again, we have to educate consumers about what's available, what's appropriate, what medicines for what indication, and learn how to teach people how to identify the qualifications of the people facilitating, because that's where people are likely to get harmed.
Mark Clear. I'm interested in knowing if there's any evidence or any research being done on whether some of these substances might have benefits for folks with various kinds of dementia.
Yeah. It's a great question, and it's nascent in terms of research. But I know if you're curious about what's currently being researched, let me just give you this beautiful caveat. Clinicaltrials.gov, you can type it in any web browser. Clinicaltrials.gov, type in the condition and what you're curious, it'll show you every study that's being done across the country, which ones are actively recruiting, and which ones are looking specifically at different compounds for different indications. And I do believe I saw one for dementia for psilocybin. People are very curious about this area. I think it's, and of course, because of the neuroconnectivity piece, right? But again, there's also the amplification piece, which is hard to predict. So, and quite frankly, for many people with cognitive disorders, there becomes some fear and anxiety about not being able to test reality. And you're taking a compound that directly compromises or shifts your sense of reality. So there's things to consider there. But yeah, I mean, people are very curious about it, but none of the studies that I can speak to.
Frank Stein, thank you very much for presenting your research. I think it's very important to have this research in the public's eye. Many years ago, Timothy Leary, did his work on LSD, and of course the whole world came down on him. Psychedelics are very powerful, and it should be noted that when it's abused, psychedelics can be very dangerous. There have not been long-term studies on the use. You mentioned in the beginning about Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley, of course, wrote the book Brave New World. The question I have, everyone, I'm always introducing a question, is what do you think of the long-term studies on psychedelics in terms of addiction? Have people with addiction who've been on psychedelics been able to maintain getting off the addictions?
I'll start. It's a great question. It's a very important one. If you see risk of abuse, misuse, and overprescribing, that's for people who are using ketamine inappropriately, essentially. And there are a lot of mail order companies that will send ketamine to people's houses at very high, large amounts. I want to be really clear in saying in any clinical research capacity, all of this research has been funded on the idea and founded on the idea that these are not maintenance medicines. These are one-time or three-time use compounds that are meant to occasion significant, profound insights that then create a path of understanding of what work is needed later. And I can tell you from being in the room with multiple individuals who've had experiences with these medicines, that when the intention is set to go within and explore the sources of your pain, these are not fun medicines. They're not party drugs. They're not necessarily intended to have like a frivolous or even, for example, one of the reasons why some of these compounds have addiction potential is because people can use them to go away for themselves by getting externally focused on the outside and not using them to go within. And when they're used to go within, there is actually really strong clinical research to demonstrate that using these in the right set and setting carries very low abuse risk potential. The problem is when people have associated relationship with these substances in partying environments or social environments where there's no container around them or intentionality about using them therapeutically, they can absolutely be misused and abused, and people can develop addictions related to that. I will say, just as a fun fact, is psilocybin is actually probably the least addictive compound that exists because you cannot build a tolerance to it. And one of the things you need for addiction is building the capacity for tolerance. So, but whereas drugs like ketamine actually can carry very high risk of abuse, certainly MDMA can, LSD can. And so, but what we do know consistently in the right set and setting with the right intention, these compounds actually show people less likely to relapse into addictive behaviors and less likely to have cravings for using other substances, which is quite staggeringly interesting.
Thank you, doctors. It's a fascinating subject, and we really appreciate you coming and sharing your knowledge with us today. I hope you come back in another year or so and give us a progress update. Let's thank them again. Wonderful program. Please join us next week for another great program. It's called Bending Granite. And there are all three agents of change with bruises and scars to prove it, and they will share engaging stories from the book that remain relevant to today's gnarly problems and reveal how we all grapple with bending granite. So don't miss it. Hope to see you all back next week. Before we leave, please stand, and we will recite the Rotary four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? We are adjourned. Have a great week.